I sat down with my morning coffee and opened my email. It was bursting at the seams as usual. I clicked on the first link and started skimming through its contents. I grew up in a haunted house, normally used to this stuff. This was the first time I was ever scared. Interesting. There was a video file attached. I clicked on it. It was a video from a doorbell camera. The video feed looked out onto a beautiful wraparound porch complete with flower boxes and an American flag blowing in the evening breeze. A few bugs flittered by, but I couldn't see why I had been sent the video. Then I saw it. Just barely visible in the darkness, peeking from behind the flower boxes was a face. It didn't move. You'd think it might be a statue by how still it was, and although about 75% of the face was obscured by the flower box, I could tell it wasn't human. The skin looked rough, like papier-mâché, and the proportions were off. It was a bit uncanny. The wind blew the flowers in the flower box, revealing slightly more of the face. One of the face's large, unblinking eyes was exposed. Like I said, the proportions were off. It was too big, with no lashes or brow, just a giant white circle with a smaller black circle in the middle. It looked almost cartoony. It started directly into the camera. I started to think someone had just placed a creepy mask in front of the camera until I saw it blink. A shiver ran up my spine and I had to turn around to check my own surroundings. I have to do that sometimes when I get scared. Just a habit from childhood. When I turned back to the video screen, the face was gone. The video clip ended a few seconds later. No, I am not getting involved with whatever that was. I sent a message back. Hey, yuck, pretty weird, but I can't help with that, sorry. Maybe try the police. Asterisk. I opened the next email. We have something in our house. I can't sleep. I'm worried for the safety of my daughter. Asterisk. Blah blah blah. Another video file was attached. The video was from a mother's cell phone as she crept silently through a house. She arrived outside of a bedroom door decorated with unicorns and a sign that read, Sarah's room, in bold letters, under which another sign spelled no boys allowed. I could hear something from the other side of the door. It's quiet at first, but as the camera draws nearer I could make out the muffled sounds of children whispering to each other and the sounds of toys being dragged across a hardwood floor. A hand comes into frame as the mother slowly pushes the bedroom door open, revealing the messy room of a little girl. Toys are strewn everywhere, Barbies, Hot Wheels and ponies. The girl, who I presume to be Sarah, is asleep in her bed. The mother says quietly to no one in particular, "Don't disturb my daughter. She needs to sleep." There are a few seconds of silence. The mother lets out a sigh of relief, feeling she's won this battle. She takes a step towards her daughter, presumably to check on her or kiss her on the forehead, when a low growl fills the room. "No," the woman says quietly, but firmly, into the room like a mother would to a misbehaving child. There's another few seconds of silence, then, like a lightning bolt, a long black arm lashes out from under the child's bed, grabs a toy from the floor of the room and pulls it back into the shadows. The mother screams in terror, the daughter wakes up screaming. The video ends. Nope. Don't feel like messing with that one. Either. I still look under my bed all the time. I shoot an email back. Pretty spooky. Asterisk. This isn't my area of expertise. Looks like you might need a priest or a rabbi or shaman or those spiritual girls you see at music festivals, but not me. Asterisk. Hope this helps. Cheeky smiley face. On to the next email. Ever since my roommate passed away, things have been going missing in my house. I think he might be haunting me. Is this a situation you could help with? Asterisk. Bingo. Easy money. During the pandemic I started a side gig as an online psychic to earn a little bit of pocket money. It started with tarot cards and palm readings and has since evolved into something else. Once COVID restrictions eased I started doing house calls. It's a fun gig. I make good money and meet some very interesting people. Only thing is I didn't believe in any of this. I would make it all up. I started off in my Zoom call days by reading a script I wrote with a couple friends. After a few beers, I've got it memorized now. Actually, I've memorized several different scripts now. Sprinkle in a little improv here and there, and I'm as good as the real thing. Honestly, I think I'm just a good salesman. Confidence takes you a long way in this racket. Sometimes I feel bad and think, maybe I should just start selling cars or something, but I can't give this up, it's just too much fun. And it's so easy. The thing is, when people lose a loved one, they start going a little bit crazy. They don't sleep, they forget to eat, they are constantly stressed out dealing with funeral arrangements, grieving loved ones and restructuring their support systems. They get a little bit harebrained and eventually they misplace something. They forget they leave the TV on downstairs and hear voices when they are lying in bed. Sometimes they are so stressed and sleep deprived they straight up hallucinate. That's where I come in. A knight in shining armor. I tell them it will all be okay. I pass a message to them from their deceased loved ones saying how proud they are of the person they have become. I prescribe some hot tea and a good night of sleep and bam, hunting nipped in the bud. The client gets a clear head and fresh start on the rest of their life and I get a pocket full of cash. The placebo effect is the real deal. I knocked on the door of the tiny shotgun house 2 days later around noon. The door opened and a small Mexican man stood in the doorway wearing jeans and a black t-shirt with Tweety Bird and the Tasmanian devil on it. He looked tired. "Hi, are you Pedro?" I asked the man. "Yeah, are you?" He pulled out one of my business cards from his pocket, Mystical Mike. Don't laugh at the name. Magic Mike was already trademarked and alliteration is a winning business strategy. Yup, that's me. I followed Pedro into the house and found myself standing in the living room. A basic setup with a TV, coffee table, couch and a love seat. The other side of the room was occupied by a small and dirty kitchen. A small kitchen table bifurcated the two spaces. A short hallway connected the living areas to 2 bedrooms and a bathroom. We sat at the kitchen table and Pedro gave me the rundown about what had been happening. His roommate passed away about 2 weeks ago under suspicious circumstances. He was a happy, healthy 28-year-old with a clean bill of health and no drugs in his system. Pedro found him dead in the bathtub. Heart attack was the official cause of death. Since his passing, Pedro claimed things have been getting moved or going missing. He says he hears his roommate's bedroom door open and close on its own some nights. You know, typical ghost shit. This was going to be another easy client. Now Pedro was Mexican, and Mexican means Catholic. Catholics grow up in a ritual-rich environment, reconciliations, confirmations, the transubstantiation of the communion. If your client is Catholic you can't just walk around the house burning sage or an incense stick. You need a ritual. You need props. I carry a bag of props with me to each job site. Every type of client needs a different type of prop. Among a few other knickknacks, it's got a handful of crystals for the spiritual girls, incense and sage for the indigenous, a Bible, Torah and a Quran for the religious, an EMF reader for the skeptics or the scientifically inclined, a couple granola bars if I get hungry, and for the Catholics I have a few crosses and rosaries. I also have a Ouija board. Some clients go crazy for the Ouija. I pulled out the Ouija board and Pedro's eyes went wide. I immediately knew this was the right tool for the job. "Are you sure about that?" he asked, pointing at the Ouija board. "I heard bad things happen after people use those things." "Don't worry Pedro, you're in the hands of a capable professional." I lied, I know exactly what I'm doing. I set up the board between us, lit some candles and burned the end of a stick of incense. Ready to blow Pedro's mind. Before starting I had one last question for Pedro. "What was your roommate's name?" "Archibald." "Oh God, seriously?" I couldn't help it. "Yeah, he went by Arch, so it really wasn't too bad." "Okay, yeah that makes sense. Let's start this thing." I placed my fingers lightly on the planchette in front of us and coaxed Pedro to do the same as I started the ceremony. I started by reciting a few Latin phrases I had memorized after taking it as a foreign language in high school. It was mostly nonsense. It started off with the opening line from one of Cicero's famous speeches that I was forced to recite for an oral exam, followed by a series of pauses and random words. Quamdiu mihi consoli designato, Catalina, insidiatus s, non publico mi presidio. Sed privata diligentia defendi, asterisk, humilio, asterisk, mea culpa, asterisk, habeas corpus, asterisk. If I ever come across a client who actually knows Latin, I'd be screwed, so it's a good thing almost no one does. I switched back over to English. "Archibald, I call you to witness." I started moving the planchette slowly around the board, not landing on anything in particular, just to give Pedro the sense something was happening. "That's not you, is it?" Pedro asked, a thin mustache of sweat forming on his upper lip. He shook his head in disbelief. For a guy with a darker complexion he was very pale. Again, I called out to the spirits, "Is this spirit of Arch?" I began to move the planchette towards the yes section of the Ouija board. About halfway there I encountered some resistance. The planchette froze. I couldn't move it. It was as if it was glued to the board itself. Weird. Improvising, I called out another question. "What do you want from Pedro?" My fingers tingled and seemed to grow hot as I tried to move the planchette. Still it remained frozen in place. Then, slowly, the wooden planchette drifted to H then E. I glanced up at Pedro to see if he was f***ing with me. His face was as white as a sheet of paper and he was taking huge deep breaths like a dying fish as he looked down at the planchette, horrified. I get the sense he was faking. The planchette continued sliding around the board. K then N over to O then W then S. He knows. Pedro looked up at me for the first time since the ritual began. He was trembling. Pedro, what's going on? I asked him, what do you know? Just then, Pedro and I both pulled our hands back in pain as the planchette erupted in flames. This is when I started to feel like I was the one being conned. I looked under the table for magnets or any type of machinery that could manipulate my planchette. I waved my hand over the flaming wooden disc in case somehow Pedro had managed to rig some sort of thin wire to it. All my searches came up empty. A primal fear grew in my belly. The planchette started sliding quickly back and forth across the Ouija board, stopping at letters too quickly for us to even register which letter it briefly rested on. No mames. Pedro shouted, what's it saying? I don't know, I had no idea what to do in this situation. Ask it to slow down. That made sense. Excuse me, ghost. Can you slow it down? You're going too fast for us to understand you. The planchette came to an abrupt halt and the small flame extinguished itself just as quickly. A beat later, Pedro and I heard a click from across the room. The television had turned itself on. Click click click. Pedro and I watched in silence as the television flicked through several channels before landing on a random daytime soap opera. It was muted. We watched the characters act out a silent argument on the screen for a few seconds before the TV unmuted itself just in time for one of the characters to shout, I said. Click click. The TV cycled through some more stations. Liam Neeson appeared on the screen, give me back. Click 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 click. The TV stopped on a wounded soldier in the jungle who screamed, my leg. Before the television muted him, Pedro gasped and clasped a hand to his mouth. Click click click. Asterisk. The TV stopped again, this time on a man in a beanie in a meth lab. It unmuted itself. Pedro got up from the table and walked into his room. I could hear him opening his closet and rummaging around. Click click click. Asterisk. I sat there in silence while the television started playing the Final Jeopardy music. The whole experience was just too bizarre. I could feel everything I had known about the world melt and rearrange itself in my head. What did any of this mean? What powers have I been tempting and tampering with the past few years, and worst of all, were all those emails I get every day actually legitimate? I felt like someone had just poured ice water down my back. I had figured they were just people pranking me. People who figured I was conning people and wanted to poke a little bit of fun. I quickly packed the Ouija board and was about to leave the house, when click 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 click. Kendrick Lamar popped up on the screen, sit down. Be humble. I sat my back down at the kitchen table. A few moments later Pedro walked back into the room carrying a disgusting looking prosthetic leg. He dropped it onto the table with a loud thud. Click 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 click. Burn it, the television shouted. I didn't see what was on the screen. Click click click. Asterisk. Samwise Gamgee was on the screen now, shouting at Frodo, throw it in the fire. Pedro pulled a lighter out of his pocket and moved towards the leg. Wait, I said to him, I'm not sure that is a good idea. Pedro looked confused. If we give it what it wants, won't it leave me alone? He was desperate, and I understood that. The past 10 minutes had completely shattered my entire worldview. Even so, I had watched enough movies to understand that when dealing with an entity like this, you shouldn't blindly bow to its will. Giving an evil entity something that it wants might only serve to make them more powerful, allowing them to tighten their grasp on you. I'll take it, I said reflexively. It was the first solution that entered my mind. I didn't want to take it, but that seemed like the path of least resistance to get the hell out of this house where I couldn't think. Be my guest. Pedro pushed the leg towards me and pocketed the lighter. The television was screaming at me. Click, click, idiot, click, fool, click 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 click. What I do have are a very particular set of skills I have acquired over a very long career. Skills that make me a nightmare for people like you. I tossed the leg into my bag and headed towards the door. Wait, Pedro called after me, don't I need to pay you? I was so focused on getting out of this house I had completely forgotten. I turned to look at Pedro and saw behind him in the kitchen all of the gas burners on the stove were ignited and the cabinets all hung open. I couldn't wait to get out of here. Just hit me on PayPal, I said, turning again to leave. Wait, Pedro called again, do you offer apprenticeships? I stared at the man, dumbfounded. Apprenticeships? What am I, a welder? No, I answered. Wait, Pedro asked yet another time, this was really cool and I'd like to be a part of it, what about internships? Jesus Christ, man, I was on the verge of breaking. I was physically repulsed by this house. My hand trembled on the doorknob. Sure, you're hired. Just call me next week, you have my number. Anything to make this guy stop asking me questions. I pulled open the door and headed to my car. The last thing I heard from the TV before I closed it behind me was, I will look for you, I will find you, and I will kill you. That's how I came into possession of the leg and my intern, Pedro, but things only got weirder from there. I got home from Pedro's and immediately sat down, pulled out the prosthetic leg and examined it. Up until this point my only experience with prosthetic limbs was when I'd stare down an old war vet in the grocery store, so I didn't have much to go on whether this was an unusual case. From the knee down it was metal, a titanium or aluminum or something, but the foot and thigh seemed to be a plastic that was wrapped in some sort of strange yellowish leather. One section of the leather had a strange marking on it. I couldn't fully make it out. It seemed the leather had been repurposed from something else which distorted the image. It almost looked like a heart with the words, "Mommy's home," written across it. The ochre leather felt strange in my hands. I could have sworn I felt it ripple as if it detested my touch. I looked everywhere on the leg for some sort of brand name or serial number, but my search came up empty. I turned to the internet. I googled, binged and asked Jeeves, but still no luck. I probably spent 2 hours looking at pictures of prosthetic limbs, as if my search history wasn't weird enough. I sat at my kitchen table with the leg laying on the table in front of me, staring off into space thinking about what my next move would be. Should I even pursue this further? As far as I knew, I had taken care of the problem at Pedro's and all was right in the world. That reminded me, I checked my PayPal balance. Pedro had paid up. That's good. Reinvigorated by my payday, I walked over to the fridge and began pouring myself a glass of water. I nearly dropped the glass when I heard a snap behind me. I spun around to see the leg, still on the kitchen table, only now it was standing, balancing perfectly on its single foot. A wave of goosebumps washed over my body. I put down the glass of water and rushed to the table. I picked up the leg and stored it in the gun safe that I kept in my bedroom closet. Once I had locked the leg up, I sat on my bed and thought about how screwed I was. I mean, what the hell was I going to do? I'd been faking all of my knowledge about this stuff for years. The internet couldn't tell me anything about this book. The only person who had any knowledge about this whatsoever was Pedro. Then I remembered that as of that morning, Pedro was technically my employee. I gave him a call. I'll sum up the call I had with Pedro in one sentence. The only question to which he didn't reply, "I don't know," was, "Please don't tell me you've forgotten my name already, Pedro." I spent the next 15 minutes talking myself off of a ledge. I must have been tricked or drugged somehow. You know what, even if everything I'd experienced that day was 100% real, what are the chances I'd encounter that entity again? Surely, it was all over. A once-in-a-lifetime sort of thing. It's not like you hear about ghost sightings on the news or anything like that. The leg was safely locked in my gun safe. In the next few days I'd find a way to dispose of it somehow. Until then, I was going to continue with my life as normal. That night, something woke me from sleep. I laid still in the darkness and wondered what had pulled me from sleep so quickly. A dream I couldn't remember. A noise. It would have had to have been loud to wake me so suddenly. Maybe I'd farted myself awake. It wouldn't have been the first time. Just when I decided it was probably nothing, I heard a noise, footsteps in my living room. I listened as they walked slowly across my creaking hardwood floors and came to a stop just outside of my bedroom door. Everyone talks about how they'd easily be able to fend off a home invader, but you don't know how to react until you're in the situation. What did I do? I froze. I wanted to shout, to jump out of bed and turn the lights on, but I found myself unable to move. I couldn't make a sound. Paralyzed, I watched my doorknob slowly turn then release as my door pushed open, its hinges giving their trademark whine. My heart pounded in my chest as I watched a man-shaped shadow crawl slowly on all fours into my bedroom. It crossed the threshold of the door and stopped. The shadow's head slowly oscillated back and forth as the creature washed its gaze across the room. It was looking for something. I could hear its raspy breathing. Synapses and neurons deep within my brain melted under stress and the flood of adrenaline. Try as I might to cry out or run, I still couldn't. I could barely form a coherent thought outside of danger. The creature advanced. Quietly, it scurried across my bedroom floor like a giant spider, only stopping feet away from me when it came across a splash of moonlight that cut the room in half through my bedroom window. The shadow seemed hesitant to cross this barrier, but after a moment, it seemed to steal its courage and continue forward. A pale hand with long, Bony Fingers was the first to cross into the illuminated shaft of Moonbeam. I could hear the long, dirty fingernails clack against the hardwood floors as it landed. A forearm followed the hand, pale and scabbed. The creature's face followed next. Ashen and gaunt, scabbed and pockmarked flesh stretched across protruding cheekbones that marked a starvation diet. Dark eyes reflected the moonlight back towards me from deep sunken sockets. Stringy, unwashed and matted hair flowed down to the creature's shoulders. I recognized the face immediately and my fear melted away. "George, get the hell out of my house," I said quietly, testing out my vocal cords that had been paralyzed just a few seconds ago. "Huh," the creature said, pretending not to hear. "George," I shouted, getting out of bed, "get the hell out of my house before I call the police. This is ridiculous, we have to have this talk again." I flipped on the bedside lamp and George hissed and covered his eyes like a vampire in sunlight. He wasn't a vampire, he was a crackhead that lived in the abandoned house next door to mine, and this wasn't the first time he'd broken into my house. The reason he was coming into my bedroom now was because he'd already stolen the TV in my living room and he knew I had one in my bedroom as well. I'd caught him a few times sitting outside my bedroom window watching whatever I happened to have on. The funny thing is I had tons of other valuables he could have easily stolen: watches, cash, laptops, gaming consoles, power tools. I even kept my bike just sitting on my front porch. He was just obsessed with stealing TVs for some reason. "George, get the hell out of my house before I Hulk out on your ass," I shouted, grabbing him by the forearm and pulling him to his feet. "I've been nice to you, haven't I? I didn't make a big deal out of the TV you stole from me. I don't call the police on you when you and your gross little friends howl at the moon when you're cracked out at 3 a.m. I even gave you all that string cheese last week. Remember how much you liked that string cheese?" "Yeah," George said weakly. He tried his best to give me puppy dog eyes, but that's nearly impossible to do under the influence of crack, so he ended up just staring at me with massive crazy eyes, like a squirrel who had just drank a gallon of espresso. "Okay, so why are you still messing with me?" I was pissed. "What happened to the lemonade stand I thought you were going to open? What happened to being an honest businessman?" "I'm sorry," George mumbled, "no one wanted to buy lemonade from me." He had a point, I wouldn't buy lemonade from a junkie who is covered in oozing scabs. We were now on my back porch and I could see the head of his junkie girlfriend, Jill, peeking at us from over the fence that separated my yard from the abandoned structure next door they lived in. "It's just we've had some hard times, is all. With you know." George closed his eyes for a moment as he desperately scoured the remains of his drug-addled brain for any reason that might excuse his actions, the economy and stuff. An idea hit me like a lightning bolt. Divine inspiration. "I have something that can help you," I told George, "stay right here." I came back a few moments later and handed him a shovel. George looked at me confused for a moment, then asked, "Should I use this too? Rob people?" "No, George, absolutely not," I shouted. Then I pulled him in close and said quietly to him, "I don't know if you want Jill over there to hear about this." I glanced over at Jill as she leered at me from the other side of the fence. She had even less teeth than the last time I'd seen her, and she didn't exactly have a full set then either. I'd say she looked like a jack-o'-lantern, but a jack-o'-lantern isn't covered in open sores. She instantly ducked down when she saw me look in her direction. I continued, "There is a lot of money to be made on that side of the fence, George. I don't know if you know this, but there is treasure buried in that backyard." George's eyes went wide again and he grabbed my shoulder to steady himself. "Are you serious?" "Yeah man, a few hundred years ago the Spanish explorer Ponce de Leon came through here and buried loads of gold and silver to keep for himself so he wouldn't have to share with the king. Only thing is he died before he could come back and get it." "It's in my backyard?" George asked, incredulous. "Yeah, but it's deep, man. I mean, really, really deep. When you think you're too deep, that means you're only halfway there." George didn't say anything else. He looked at the shovel, looked at me, looked over at Jill who was back peering over the fence line, then he ran back over to the abandoned house. Asshole didn't even say thank you. I was happy with myself. I'd learned a while ago the best way to deal with a crackhead is to keep them occupied. Those guys have laser-like focus. Once you give them a task, it's only once their minds start to wander do you have a problem. Also, they'll believe pretty much anything. Once I told George they legalized crack in Guatemala, and within 24 hours he had robbed a Barnes & Noble of all of their French to English dictionaries. He practiced French for a week before I told him they speak Spanish in Guatemala. He gave up pretty soon after that, but still learned a pretty impressive amount of a new language in such a short time. I figured the treasure hunt would buy me 2 weeks. Enough time to get some new locks, maybe a dog. If I was lucky, those guys would hit a water line and the city would finally be forced to come out and evict them. The next day I took a peek through a hole in the fence to see George digging. He'd created several small holes all over his backyard, each about knee deep. I shouted through the hole in the fence, "It's buried deep." When you think you're too deep, that means you're only halfway there. George and Jill leapt to attention at the sound of my voice, both of them gazing up into the clouds. They thought it was God talking to them. I chuckled to myself and thought maybe in a couple days I'd throw a cheap gold ring or necklace into the hole when no one was watching. Give him something to find, give him some motivation, prove to him this was all real. A little taste of the treasure just below his feet if he kept digging. Over the next few days, I watched George's progress on the dig through the hole in the fence. Each day I saw less and less of George as he disappeared into the ever-deepening hole in the ground. Reading the papers one morning I saw a local hardware store had been robbed. The following day I looked over the fence to see an entire crew of skinny and pockmarked junkies working on the dig. A few of the addicts had started their own holes elsewhere in the yard. Another group of crackheads set to work building a pulley system to haul dirt out of the, now incredibly deep, main hole. The operation had become more than I'd planned. A few more days and I'd have to put an end to it. Every day the risk of a cave-in increased and I didn't want anyone getting hurt because of my lie. I also didn't want a giant crackhead construction site next door to my house. I mean, that definitely couldn't be good for my property value. I was sitting on my back patio sipping my morning coffee when I heard a commotion from next door. Shouts and screams followed by a literal stampede of a dozen skinny junkies hopping over the fence and running off into the surrounding neighborhood. Another thing to know about junkies, when something goes sideways they scatter like cockroaches. Nothing is worth the risk of their own freedom. Even if they've done nothing wrong, just the idea of interacting with a police officer is enough to send them running. I hopped the fence to survey the scene. A half-dozen holes dotted the yard. Some just barely started, some 6 to 10 feet deep. One massive hole stood in the center of them all. It was probably 10 feet wide at its mouth and descended into the darkness of an unknown depth. I heard moaning coming from deep within the hole. Someone was hurt. I rushed back over to my house and grabbed a ladder from the garage before rushing back over. I stood at the base of the hole and dropped the ladder in. The ladder was far too short and vanished into the darkness before landing with a crash. Almost simultaneous to the crash, a loud, "Ow! Fuck!" reverberated up from the hole. Idiot, I cursed myself. Panic makes us do stupid things. I found a length of rope and tied one end of it to a fence post and threw the remainder of the length into the pit. Judging by the slack left in the rope, it was long enough. I lowered myself into the hole and began to descend into the darkness. The hole was incredibly deep and impressively reinforced with timber struts every few meters, another lesson to never doubt the can-do attitude of a group of crackheads. Light was becoming scarce. As I descended, the darkness below seemed to reach up and grab at me. Finally, I reached the bottom, which was a shitshow of epic proportions. George lay whimpering on the cold earthen floor of the pit, bleeding from a deep gash in his forehead. The pulley system George and his crew had built had failed and crashed down onto him. To make it worse, some asshole threw a ladder down here on him. Poor guy. He was lucky he wasn't dead. Then again, it is very difficult to kill a crackhead. I found it, George said weakly, tangled up in a mess of rope and broken timbers, the treasure. I looked more closely at him in the dim light and found he was cradling a small box in his arms. Metal, rectangular, no larger than a cigar box. It had a small lock clasping it shut, like the ones you would find on someone's luggage. I couldn't believe it was real. There is no way he could have found something this deep in the earth. The hole was deep enough you were more likely to find something from the Pleistocene than the age of exploration. I threaded the rope through George's belt loops and climbed out of the hole myself before pulling him up out of the hole, then laying his semi-conscious body on the grass next to the pit. I phoned 911 and requested an ambulance. While I was waiting for emergency services to arrive, I took the small metal box from George's iron grip and left it on my kitchen table for me to open later. When the ambulance finally arrived, George awoke from his stupor as if on cue. I watched for a few minutes as George fended off the advancing paramedics with a shovel before he mistakenly fell backwards into the massive hole he dug, landing with a crash that was audible from my side of the fence. Firefighters came and fished him out again before he was taken away in an ambulance. I haven't seen him since. I hope he's doing well. He probably is. I'm quite sure he's indestructible. After that fiasco, I headed back home to deal with the box George had been carrying. I brought the box out onto my back patio and knocked the cheap lock off of it with a hammer and slowly lifted the lid to see what was inside. The hair on the back of my neck stood at attention when I saw the contents of the box. My hands shook and I was suddenly overcome with the feeling I was being watched. I stood up and scanned my surroundings, looking for the source of the feeling, then I saw it, the fucking leg. It was standing, unsupported, at my bedroom window. How? I'd locked it in the gun safe. I moved a few feet to my right to get a better view of the cursed prosthetic end. The leg seemed to turn in place as it was tracking my movement. The goddamn thing was watching me. I knew what it wanted me to do. I went over to the box and lifted out the contents. It was an envelope, addressed to me. I opened it and read the note inside. It was only 5 words. Give me back my leg. My heart jumped up into my throat. Okay, I wasn't tripping, this shit is real, I said to myself as I paced back and forth on my back patio, trying to formulate a plan. I stole a quick glance back over to my bedroom window, the leg was gone. I quickly waddled off my concrete patio and onto the grass of my backyard, where I dropped to my knees and threw up. I needed a plan. I paced my bedroom floor wondering what I should do next. I'd already placed the leg back in the gun safe. Then searched the entirety of my house looking for something Christian to place on top of it. It seemed to work in the movies and I didn't really have any idea what else to do. I couldn't find my bag of religious paraphernalia, so I ended up fashioning a small crucifix out of 2 large carrots and hot glue with a little Jesus made out of raisins. I needed a plan. I was thinking about who might know more information about the artifact I'd come into possession of. Then it hit me, all of my competitors. Surely not all of them were fakes like me. One by one, I called them up and set up meetings for that afternoon, staggered appointments of course. The first one to show up was a woman named Destiny. I sent her home immediately after she tracked dog shit into my house from the bottom of her shoes. I will not work with someone who is not only rude but completely oblivious. The second one was a guy named Tiger, which I thought was a badass name and he was a pretty cool guy. Too bad he failed every test I threw at him. I sent him home, but kept his number in case I wanted to try to connect with him sometime to hang out. The third psychic was a total nutcase named Psycho Jimmy. I'm honestly not even sure if he was a medium or if Google search just lumped the words, psychic, and psycho, into the same page due to a lack of results. He didn't say a word to me the entire time. He came into my house, drank a glass of water, walked a lap around the living room, stared directly into my eyes, unblinking, for a solid 30 seconds, then simply left. Total fucking psycho indeed. And yes, I did upgrade my security system shortly after meeting him. Out of options I reluctantly called Destiny back, even if she did smell like dog poop. To my surprise, she didn't smell like shit when she showed back up to my house. She explained to me that it wasn't her that smelled but it was, in fact, the ghost of her dead dog, Hercules, that followed her around. She further explained that last winter, her dog passed away peacefully in his sleep. She was distraught, but thought it would be in bad taste to leave a dead dog lying on her living room floor, so she loaded the carcass up into a cardboard box along with his favorite blanket and a few toys. Then she sealed the top of the box with packing tape so animals couldn't get in, and left the box out on her front porch where the cold December weather would keep him fresh for a day until she could gather herself long enough to make arrangements. Porch pirates showed up not an hour later and stole the box off of her porch thinking they just scored a nice heavy Amazon delivery. I can't imagine how they must have felt to open it up and find a dead dog. Now Hercules walks the earth as a ghost, unable to rest until he has his revenge against those that stole his bones away from his loving mother. Okay, I had no idea what to say in response to hearing such an insane story. Well, can you have Hercules stay outside please? Yeah, no problem, she replied before bending at the waist to pet an invisible dog and whisper loving comments into its ears before following me into my kitchen. So how do I know you're legit? Was the first question I asked her when we were both seated at the table. Because I can see the ghost that is standing in your bedroom door, she replied calmly. I spun around in my chair towards my bedroom door just in time to watch it violently slam itself shut. You're hired. I recapped the entire situation to Destiny, who asked to see the leg. She recoiled as soon as I placed it on the table in front of her. You didn't tell me it's upholstered in human flesh, she said, pretty big detail to leave out. It is. I asked. She pointed to a pinkish-brown blemish on the leather that covered the back thigh of the leg. There is literally a nipple on it. Closer inspection showed that she was right. The leg did indeed have a nipple on it. And here is a tattoo, she said pointing at a heart-shaped blemish. If you looked closely, you could just barely make out the words, "Mommy's home." Look, I don't know what this leg is, but I know a professor at my old college who might know, Destiny said. She couldn't take her eyes off of the nipple. He specializes in ancient pagan literature and has several books bound with human skin in his collection. If anyone knows anything about this, it has to be him. With no other avenues to go down, I agree to talk with this professor would be a good place to start. Destiny left my house promising to call me tomorrow to let me know if her old professor had replied to her request to meet. Once again, I was alone with the leg. Looking at the leg filled me with a strange sort of terror that I hadn't felt since I was kid. The kind of helplessness you would feel as a child when you lost your mom in the mall, or when you were so sure that the shadow in the corner of your bedroom was a monster lying in wait until the moment you cross from wakefulness into sleep. I brought the leg back to the gun safe and locked it away before leaving my house for the day. I didn't have much in the way of errands, but I didn't even want to be in the same building as the leg. I wasted the day trying to get my mind off the absolute shitstorm of a week I'd had so far. Ghosts, monsters, demons, and God knows what else is real. How is someone supposed to just accept that and move forward with their lives? What else might be out there? Is God real? If so, that might be the scariest thing of all. I went to the movies, but couldn't pay attention. I went to my favorite restaurant, but didn't have an appetite. I tried to go go-karting, but couldn't get over how strange it was to go go-karting by myself. I spent the entire day thinking about how my inbox was full of things I'd thought were fake but now would never fully get over. Eventually the sun fell and I found myself standing on my front porch trying to come up with any excuse to go and spend money on a hotel room. I almost did, but realized I was too broke to get one even if I wanted to. A creeping dread wormed its way up my back as I walked through the dark house flipping lights on as went. I checked each room to make sure nothing had moved the positions I had left them in that morning. Looking back, I'm not sure if at that point I was more afraid of a ghost or demon or Psycho Jimmy in my house. Everything seemed to check out. Feeling slightly better, but still a bit anxious, I went to bed. I woke up in total darkness. In the early morning, I could hear the wind in the trees. I turned over to squint at my alarm clock when the sound of my bedroom door unlatching made my stomach drop. In a flash I shot up in bed and tried to flip on the lamp on my nightstand only to find the light bulb had been removed. I grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight and directed the light at the door. The door was, indeed, unlatched and cracked open just a sliver. I sat in total silence, watching the small black crack between the door and the door frame, my ears strained to pick up any noise other than the wind outside. My jaw dropped as the door slowly creaked forward, opening itself just wide. Enough for a head to peek into the room, but no one was there, just the empty blackness of the dark hallway beyond. My hands shook as I stared at the doorway, hoping something would come through. Anything, a monster, a zombie, Psycho Jimmy. Anything would be better than the dread of sitting there in anticipation, my imagination conjuring up the worst. My heart was pounding against my ribcage and my mouth went dry. I gripped my phone with two hands to try to steady the shaking, but still they trembled, sending shadows dancing across my bedroom walls. Then the door closed, just as slowly as it had opened. The door pulled itself back into its frame and latched itself closed. Realizing I had forgotten to breathe, I sucked in air like a dying fish. I licked my lips and loosened my grip on my phone, but my hands were still trembling and I dropped it. The phone bounced off the corner of my nightstand, hit the carpeted floor and bounced again under my bed. A whole new set of shadows filled the room as the bright, fluorescent white light of the iPhone flashlight emanated from under my dirty bed. It might sound weird, but this was almost as bad as the door opening by itself. The loss of control was devastating in the moment and I lunged over the side of the bed and blindly flailed my arm around searching for the phone. My thrashing arms sent a wholly new set of shadows dancing around my room, pushing my pulse even higher. I'd never regretted not cleaning my room harder. I was wildly grabbing things and flinging them out from under the bed as soon as I confirmed they weren't a cell phone. Magazines, old electronics and a few rock-hard socks flew across the room as I shoveled them out from under the bed. I continued to grasp blindly when my hand came across something I didn't immediately recognize. It was a mess of tangled stringy material that seemed to grab at my hand as I brushed past it. I gripped and tugged hard to bring it out onto my bedroom floor, but encountered resistance as whatever it was seemed to cling to its secret refuge under my bed. I re-established my grip on the object and pulled again, harder this time. I engaged the muscles in my stomach and back end. Just as it seemed the object would never relent, a loud pop echoed through the room as the object came free in my hand. Startled and thrown off balance, I fell off my bed and sprawled onto the carpet below with the object still in my hand. I looked down at it and my blood turned to ice as I realized I was holding a woman's head, her face frozen in surprise, her mouth wide. Oh. I dropped the head and scrambled backwards on my butt until my back hit the opposite wall. It was only then I realized it was the head of a sex doll I had ordered 4 years ago, but never used. It was too weird. Maybe guys who like sex dolls would also like fucking dead bodies. Not for me. Her name was Cynthia. I had hidden her under my bed in shame shortly after bringing her home and had forgotten about her. It's not like a life-size doll is something you can easily throw away without the neighbors asking questions. I relaxed at that moment. A wave of relief and amusement washed over me and I made a vow to get rid of Cynthia that weekend. Even if that meant I had to cut her into pieces and dispose of her in separate trash bags thrown into separate dumpsters like some sort of mannequin serial killer. I started to get back up on my feet when the shadows danced around the room again. I glanced toward the space under the bed and saw the light was moving. Something under my bed had control of my phone. Blinded by the light which was now pointed directly at me, I squinted my eyes to try to make out what fresh new terror was about to befall me. Slowly a form came into shape. A contorted silhouette that writhed in the confined space. It banged against the bed frame above it as it tried to right itself. The light moved, left, right, up, down as the dark shape twisted violently, but it always pointed the light directly into my eyes without fail. For a moment, the noises below the bed stopped and the light remained still. The only noises audible were my own breathing and the wind that continued to whip the trees outside. I used my hand to shield my eyes from the now stable point of light and the shape solidified into a new form. It was a person crouched low. A headless person. It was Cynthia. She began to slowly crawl towards me. My heart skipped a beat as fear paralyzed me for a half second. Cynthia moved closer, moving in a jerky, unnatural motion because I hadn't opted for the real girl realistic joint package. My heart skipped another beat as curiosity paralyzed me for another half a second. Would it really be so bad to let her get to me? What would she do? Fuck me to death? Then I remembered she had fully articulated hands and a skeleton made out of titanium which snapped me out of it pretty quickly. Cynthia dragged herself along, now halfway out from under the bed, my cell phone in hand. I leapt into action. I sprang to my feet, took a few steps towards her and kicked at her. Unfortunately, it was dark and I aimed where a head would have been had this been a real person, or a fully functional sex doll, and broke a toe on my metal bed frame. Cynthia grabbed for me, but I quickly took a step back and she narrowly missed, her silicone fingers just brushing the skin of my leg. I tried another kick and this time aimed for my cell phone. I connected and sent the phone sliding across the bedroom carpet where it collided with the wall with such force that it flipped itself over, landing the flashlight side down. The room plunged into darkness with the exception of the small light of my iPhone lock screen. I needed to get to the phone before the lock screen went dark in about 10 seconds, otherwise I would probably never find it. I made a dash for the phone, but Cynthia caught my ankle, sending me crashing to the floor. I couldn't look back. I needed that phone, that light. Even if it was only so I could see how I was going to die, I needed it. Worst case scenario, if I decided I didn't like what I was seeing, I could always just turn the light off. Not even wasting the time to stand back up, I crawled for my phone. I could hear the joints in Cynthia's arms and legs squeak as she emerged from the bed behind me and stood herself up. When I ordered her, they said the squeaking would fade with use, but like I said, I never used her. I want to make that very clear. Still, I didn't look back. I crawled forward, not paying attention to the rug burn on my knees or the pain that radiated up my leg from my broken toe or the 6-foot-tall girl's, call me, murderous sex bot that was standing itself up a mere few feet behind me. I need that phone. I slammed my hand on the phone just as the light from the home screen faded away and I turned and pointed the flashlight at Cynthia. She stood tall on her 2 feet, wearing a tattered and dusty schoolgirl outfit. I'm different now. One large pendulous breast hung outside of her brassiere. I was done for. Toast. Stick a fork in me. I was lying on my back, looking up at a killer dominatrix with a titanium skeleton, no head and 0 pain receptors. All she had to do was fall forward and she'd be on top of me, strangling me with her delicate, perfectly formed and articulated fingers. Maybe, if I was lucky, her other breast would fall out of her shirt in the fall. You know, at least give me something to look at as life drained from me. Fortunately for me, that isn't what she did. The killer doll took one step towards me and faltered. The thing about sex dolls is that they are mainly designed to sit in chairs, pose on all fours and do a lot of lying on their backs. No one buys a sex doll to have it stand around. That's like buying a dildo to use as a Christmas tree ornament. Sure, maybe with a little practice and a couple hidden supports you could have it stand around your house like some sort of fucked up anime wax museum, but that's just not what it is designed to do. Especially if you didn't spring for the real girl realistic joint package. I honestly doubt a real human woman would be able to stand unassisted if you gave them the strange cartoony proportions most of these dolls have. So, Cynthia took a step towards me, wobbled, top heavy. Tried to overcorrect, then fell backwards onto my nightstand and started squirming to get back on her feet. I took the opportunity to run. I got back to my feet and found the bedroom door. My hand hesitated on the knob for a millisecond as I considered what else there might be hiding behind this door, then I opened it anyway. I rushed out of my bedroom and sprinted down the hallway, hearing moans and clicking and growling from behind the doors of the bathroom and second bedroom as I rushed past. I came to the end of the hallway to the main living area and kitchen and turned to head towards the door when I took one last look down the dark hallway towards my bedroom. Just barely visible through the darkness was Cynthia, crawling on all fours out of the bedroom. Her head was now reattached but backwards so she faced the ceiling as she crawled forward, her nails making a click-clack sound as she crossed from the carpeted bedroom to the hardwood floor of the hallway. I shuddered and made for the door. My plan was to get in the car and drive away, but I left my car keys inside. Instead, I walked to Walmart, the one place on earth where you can walk around in boxers and a white t-shirt and no one bats an eye. For the second time in 12 hours, I was trying to distract myself to take my mind off of the horrors the lifting of the veil had shown me, and this time I was stuck in a Walmart, the epicenter of human horror. It actually wasn't too bad, I only had a few hours to kill before the sun came up. At that point, I'd head back to my place, get some clothes and catch up with Destiny to see if she had scheduled a meeting with her old professor yet. I supposed I'd be expecting a call from Pedro at some point as well. I did promise him an internship. I just hoped I could run faster than him. I woke up to something tickling my nose. Something small and damp flicked across my nose. I reached out to wave it away, but it would return within seconds. I opened my eyes to see myself eye to eye with a snake. I instinctively jerked backwards and nearly tumbled off the toilet I'd fallen asleep on. After the initial shock of waking up face to face with a decently sized snake wore off, I was able to redirect my focus from the snake to the man who was actually holding it. It was Psycho Jimmy. After a rough night with very little sleep followed by a few hours of aimless wandering around Walmart, I had become dead tired and locked myself in the bathroom stall to try and find a private place to take a nap. Obviously, it wasn't private enough as Psycho Jimmy had crawled under the stall door, somehow procured a snake and woke me up by holding it up to my face to let its tongue flick out across my nose. Seeing I was awake, Psycho Jimmy thrust the snake further in my direction as if offering it to me. I waved a hand in a sign of refusal and he pulled the snake back and placed it in a pocket inside his jacket. Having never been in a situation like this, locked in a bathroom stall with a man nicknamed Psycho, I had no idea how to react, so I thanked him for waking me up as I had a big day ahead of me. Psycho Jimmy nodded his head in acknowledgement, winked at me, then left the way he came, by crawling out under the stall door. I waited until I heard him leave, then I waited another 10 minutes before I left the bathroom. I had 3 missed calls and 2 unread text messages. The first of the text messages read, "Bro, I'm too high right now." The second message read, "Sorry boss, that wasn't for you." The text messages were obviously from Pedro. The calls were from Destiny. I called Destiny back. She was understandably annoyed. "You do realize what time it is, right?" I glanced at the clock for the first time that day. It was noon. "We have an appointment for 3 p.m. and it's an hour drive if we don't hit traffic. Are we doing this or not?" I was embarrassed. "Aw shit, I'm sorry. I had a, weird night. Look if yo." Destiny cut me off. "Oh, yeah, I get that. I figured that would happen when I saw that ghost in your bedroom yesterday. It didn't seem, well, nice. Look," I continued, "I hate to be a burden, but do you think you could pick me up from Walmart?" 15 minutes later Destiny pulled into the Walmart parking lot driving a convertible Volkswagen Beetle. Boxers and a t-shirt at Walmart. "You definitely had a rough night. Hop in." We stood on my doorstep and Destiny begged me to let her inside. "Please let me go in with you. We need all the evidence we can find on this thing if we are going to figure out what it is and how to stop it." She made a good point. "That's true," I started my rebuttal, "but it might be dangerous." "If it's dangerous then 2 is better than 1, damn." She had me beat. "Alright, but I have no idea what we might see in there." I turned the knob and pushed the door open. Immediately the stench of cigarettes washed over us and I sprang into action, running into the kitchen to grab a knife. I was so focused on getting a weapon in my hands that I didn't even notice the source of the smell. So, what the hell is that? Destiny asked, a finger pointing into the living room where Cynthia sat in an armchair. She was naked, cross-legged and held a smoldering cigarette in between two of her fingers. Her head was now screwed on correctly. That is, I almost said, Cynthia, and that would have made me look like a total perv, something I've never seen before. I walked over to Cynthia and took the cigarette out of her hand, extinguished it, then plunged the kitchen knife deep into her chest, which accomplished exactly nothing. I'm going to brush my teeth and grab some clothes and we'll get out of here, okay? Okay, Destiny replied. Anything else? We'll be gone most of the day. Yeah, I said back to her, I'm going to call my intern. 15 minutes later I was sitting shotgun in Destiny's car as we drove to Pedro's house to pick up my new employee. Cynthia was buckled up in the backseat. I had to beg Destiny to help me take it out of the house. She definitely didn't believe me when I said I'd never seen her before. Which is fine, I didn't believe her when she said her ghost dog, Hercules, was sitting in the backseat with Cynthia, although the car did smell like there was a dog in there with us. Maybe there really was a vengeful ghost dog with us. We pulled up to Pedro's house and again I had to convince Destiny to help me lug her out of the car and into the trash can. Will he be okay with this? She asked. I'm his boss, he has to be. We tossed her in the can, but because of her weird robot-esque joints she didn't fit too well and a leg poked out of the half-closed lid. I sent Pedro a text and he came bounding out of his house like golden retriever but stopped dead in his tracks as soon as he saw the leg sticking out of his trash can. Oh shit, he shouted, you guys smoke somebody. He looked nervous. Just a demon, Pedro. That's just a demon. Hop in. Oh, that's dope dude. Pedro hopped in. Where are we going? We're going to the local college, Destiny chirped. Aw shit, we don't have to go to class, do we? Pedro moaned. We arrived 30 minutes before our meeting with Destiny's old professor, Harold Potter. I shit you not, his name was Harry Potter, but apparently, he would get pretty upset if you called him anything other than Professor Potter. The three of us sat across from Professor Potter in his shabby basement office surrounded on all sides by dusty books of various sizes and ages. I pulled the leg we came to question him about out of my backpack and slid it across the table to him. Oh, it has a nipple. How exciting, he exclaimed as he poked and prodded at the fake limb with a gloved finger. That's a nipple. Pedro could hardly contain his excitement. I thought that was a chocolate stain or something. Does this mean the leg is a girl? There was a beat of silence as we took a second to question if that really was the first thing Pedro sought to ask. Destiny broke the silence. Professor, we wanted to ask you what you could tell us about this leg. It is clearly bound in human skin, so you were the only person I could think of to consult. Any leads would be very helpful. Let me start with a question of my own. The professor was gently turning the leg over to examine it. Where did you find it? Destiny and I both braced ourselves for whatever might come out of Pedro's mouth. My roommate Archie and I were at an illegal street race in Kansas City, Kansas, and one of the cars crashed and blew up into a giant fireball. Everyone in the room leaned in waiting for whatever insane nonsense followed, and then Destiny nudged him. Then the police showed up and the law says that if the police use rubber bullets, then it's okay to start looting. Harry Potter's eyes were wide as saucers. I patted Pedro on the shoulder. Keep going, buddy. I met a guy named Snake and we decided to loot a food truck that was parked nearby, but none of the food inside was cooked, so we got a whole crew together and we flipped that bitch. Pedro. Focus. Destiny was mortified about her favorite old professor associating her with a person as insanely stupid as Pedro. Where did the leg come from? Oh, I don't know, Pedro continued. Archie had it at the end of the night when I met back up with him at the motel. He had a bunch of wine and a whole mess of these crackers with him too. They weren't very good though. So, your friend robbed a church? Destiny asked, red in the face. Oh, I don't know, Pedro said, smiling, just happy to be there. Well, boys and girls, Harry Potter said, all I can tell you is that this leg certainly appears to be bound in human flesh. I cannot confirm for certain without rigorous testing, but the nipple on the reverse side certainly points toward human. How common is the practice of binding books in human skin? I asked, curious. Well, certainly not as common as it once was, Professor Potter said with a laugh. In ancient times anthropodermic bibliophagy was much more common. Still quite rare, mind you, but common in comparison to today. He rubbed his chin then continued, the question of why people did it however remains a mystery. We have evidence it was sometimes done to honor the work, to show respect to the actual writing itself. There are times when the skin of criminals was used as sort of a novelty, to create a collector's item, so to say. There are also examples of anthropodermic bibliophagy, which is when an author uses their own skin to bind their own book. I wish I could give you more information, but maybe you could ask some of the other professors. Try Professor McGonagall in anthropology. We ascended the stairs out of the basement office, Professor McGonagall. I asked, what is this fucking Hogwarts? Professor McGonagall sent us to the Foreign Languages Department, which sent us to the Religious Studies Department, who then rerouted us back to the History Department, who referred us back to Professor Harry Potter. I can't believe no one here can tell us anything about this leg, Destiny lamented. I thought for sure Professor Potter would be a bigger help. Destiny and I sat in silence on a bench near the student union and watched as Pedro tried asking nearly every single girl who walked past him for their phone number. He approached a tall redhead who, instead of entertaining the idea of a conversation with Pedro, took off in a full sprint the other direction. It's okay, Pedro, I shouted to him. Maybe she thought you were so handsome she just had to go tell her friends about you. You shouldn't encourage him, Destiny said to me in a low tone so Pedro wouldn't hear. You're probably right, I replied. Hey, did you see that heart-shaped mark on the leg? If that's human skin, then it's a tattoo, right? Yeah, so what? Well, where do the kids with lots of tattoos hang out? Maybe we can ask them if they'd seen it before or if they recognize the artist. It was the only idea I could think of to salvage the situation. Definitely the art department. Let's go there. We walked into the unsymmetrically lit room where a ring of art students surrounded a naked man on a pedestal. Some were sketching him with pencils, some with charcoal, and a few were painting. There were a lot of tattooed people in this crowd. Lots of eyeliner and spiked collars too. Pedro was mortified at the naked man. Dude, does no one else see the naked guy? This is disgusting, let's get out of here. Pedro, just close your eyes. Pedro was getting on Destiny's last nerve. As a matter of fact, go stand in the corner and don't speak for the next 72 hours. We waited on the periphery of the circle until the class ended, then we approached the teacher, a middle-aged man in skinny jeans, fedora, eyeliner and a spiked collar. His name was Indigo and he thought he looked far cooler than he actually did. We presented the leg to Indigo and he instantly stood up from his desk, walked over to the door and locked it. Where did you get that? He asked. Hey, I still need to get out of here, man, said the model, who was now putting on his clothes in the corner of the room. Everyone ignored him. You know what this leg is? Destiny and I said in unison. I know what it is. What I'm asking is, why do you have it and why did you bring it into my classroom? A voice called from the corner of the room opposite the model putting on his clothes. It was Pedro. I was at an illegal street race in Kansas City and... Shut up. Destiny and I said in unison. We don't know where it came from, Destiny continued, pointing over to Pedro, who was standing motionless and staring at a blank canvas. That's Pedro. The leg belonged to his roommate. We aren't exactly sure of its origins. Indigo furrowed his brow, clearly not happy with the origin story. And why did you bring it to me? Because we've gone to nearly every other department at this school and no one has any clue what it is. The art department was kind of a Hail Mary. I explained. Can you help us? I can tell you what you need to know, but that is it. Indigo couldn't tear his eyes away from the fake limb. I don't want any part of this. I don't want that thing anywhere near me. What is it? I asked. It's my mother-in-law. Indigo continued to stare at the flesh-bound limb. You're married, I tried to put it together, to this leg's daughter. Son. Indigo finally peeled his eyes away from the leg and looked at me. My mother-in-law created the leg with my late wife's skin. How do we know you're telling the truth? I asked. Indigo pointed to the mommy's home tattoo on the cursed leg's thigh. You see that tattoo? He asked. Before we could answer, Indigo grabbed hold of his shirt collar with both hands and ripped his shirt clean off his body like he was a professional wrestler. Emblazoned across his chest was a massive tattoo of a heart. Written across it were the words, Daddy's home. Yeah, Hulkamania, shouted Pedro from across the room. I still need to get out of here. Can you please unlock the door? Asked the model, who was now standing next to the locked door. Destiny and I looked at each other in disbelief. What the was going on in your family? Was the only thing I could think to ask. Indigo continued. My wife died unexpectedly in a car accident while I was hiking the Appalachian Trail, something I'd always wanted to do and something my wife encouraged me to conquer before I got too old. My mother-in-law, who was always deeply into the occult, kept my wife's death a secret. She told no one, not even her other children. Instead, she tried to resurrect her. Indigo walked around his desk that was cluttered with charcoal sketches and stacks of watercolor still life paintings. He sunk into his chair and ran his fingers through his sweaty hair before swiveling in his chair to regard a large portrait that hung above his desk. The painting was of a middle-aged woman in a gray sweatsuit. Brown, shoulder-length hair and dark circles under her eyes. She looked bored. Indigo let loose a heavy sigh and without turning from the portrait picked up his story where he left off. My wife wanted to be cremated. Instead, her body putrefied in a damp basement as her own mother performed ritual after ritual to call her back from the other side. Calling on angels, demons and the old gods alike, none answered her pleas. She tried to heat the blood and pump it fresh back into the body. She tried electric shocks to the heart and brain and she prayed day and night. None of it worked. She turned to other disciplines, voodoo, Santeria, Halo Mayambi, YouTube tutorials, still none of it worked. I turned to look at Destiny who was enthralled. I glanced then at Pedro who was staring deeply into a blank canvas like it was the most interesting painting he'd ever seen. Then she did this, Indigo continued, pointing at the leg. I don't know what it is or how she did it. I assumed she was trying to build her a new body. The only facts I know for sure are when I found my wife's body it had large pieces of flesh removed and all that I could find of my mother-in-law was the notes she kept. I'm not sure if she died, or was transported to another plane or if she's contained within the leg itself. But I'm done with it. I still need someone. The model started before I cut him off. Why are you giving up on this? Don't you want to know what happened? Wouldn't your wife want you to keep pushing? I asked. Indigo sat in silence for a moment, his chest heaving giving the impression that the heart tattoo across it was beating. We tried to figure out what happened. We tried to destroy the leg. We tried to get rid of it for months and it just kept coming back. Eventually we gave it to a priest in Kansas City, Kansas for safekeeping and that seemed to work. I thought it was finally out of my life and now you idiots brought it right back to me. I want nothing to do with it. I'm done. You're saying, who else tried to help you with this? Destiny asked. Indigo pointed up to the painting that hung above his office desk. She did. That is my sister. She was helping get to the bottom of all of this. After a day's research she was spending the night at my house. I had fixed up an air mattress for her in my studio. When I came in to check on her the next morning, this painting was all I could find. So, you're saying she got turned into a painting? How do you know it's her and not just, like, a painting of her? Destiny questioned. It blinks sometimes, Indigo answered. His answer made my skin crawl. Not the fact that the painting could blink. I'd seen much worse stuff in the last 96 hours. What really twisted my stomach was thinking about his sister's fate. If she could blink, she was still alive. She just couldn't move, breathe, or communicate. A complete and total paralysis. Imagine locked-in syndrome on a much bigger scale. I'd rather be dead. I took another glance at Pedro who was still engrossed in the blank white canvas he'd been staring at the entire time. He leaned in and licked it, smacked his lips and continued to stare at it like it was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. Someone please let me out, I have a class to get to, the model pleaded. Shut up. Destiny, Indigo and I all shouted at once. In hindsight we weren't very nice to that guy. Defeated, the model walked over to look at some of the other canvases near Pedro. Destiny asked another good question. You said you guys were doing research on the leg, right? Did you find any way to destroy it? Kind of. Indigo cleared his throat before carrying on. We spoke to a tattoo artist in Olathe named T-Bone. He was really into the occult and all that. He said, the only way to destroy something like this leg is to expose it to an act of true beauty or true love. We asked if he could be more specific or give an example of something like that, but he just told us he was late to do battle with a warlock in Jefferson City. I assume he lost the battle, because I never saw him again. The three of us sat in quiet reflection trying to think of an example of true love or beauty. All I could think of were sappy rom-coms and, for some reason, a particular Melissa Etheridge song. A loud thud shook us from our brainstorm and Indigo, Destiny and I all turned towards the sound of the clatter. That side of the room was empty save for a few canvases and the gym bag the model had been carrying. Where'd Pedro go? I asked. Destiny pointed her finger towards a canvas. There. God damn it. Not again, shouted Indigo. I walked over and looked at the canvas. It was a painting of Pedro. Him standing solitary in a gray void, his hands in his pockets and his expression blank. A few feet away another canvas contained the image of the model. A pit grew in my stomach. The clock was officially ticking. We needed to snuff out this prosthetic leg before anyone else was killed, maimed or sucked into a painting. Destiny tucked the painting of Pedro under her arm as we headed out of the classroom. Take the other one too. Indigo shouted as we left, but we ignored him. We walked to the car in silence, each of us thinking of the enormity of the situation we'd found ourselves in. All either of us did was answer an ad on the internet and, all of a sudden, we'd found ourselves locked in a battle with an entity from the other side of the veil. An entity we couldn't touch or see, but now we'd realized it could see us, touch us, and if it wants, kill us. The internet. As our car pulled out of the university parking lot, we drove past a disheveled-looking man on a park bench who seemed to be watching us. My heart skipped a few beats when I recognized him as Psycho Jimmy. Was he following me? It simply couldn't be a coincidence. The man was showing up everywhere I went. Something told me he had a part to play in all of this. I didn't tell Destiny about Psycho Jimmy. We had enough on our minds already, chiefly what the f is a true act of beauty or love.